Good morning, Hemshech Ayin Beis, Volume 3. We're on page 1467. Explaining the concept of Yichud, that though the world was created and it's a world filled with details, infinite amount of details, and as well as being concealed from the divine, our mission, our Aveda, our job is to come into a world like this and reveal Hashem Echad, the Achdus Hashem, like you said, the mitzvah of Yichud. And we do that through two levels of Yichud, Yichud Idah and Yichud Tata, which are the first two first verses, Shema and Baruch Shem, or more specifically, in Shema itself, Hashem Elokeinu and Hashem Echad. And to explain this Achdus that we introduce, the Rebbe Rashab is giving us the details of what does the contemplation consist of in Shema and Baruch Shem. And it began with understanding that the worlds are created Yesh Ma'ayin, not Yesh Miyesh. Not like the mistake of the philosophers, that thing, the Isavas Abriya, is in form of cause and effect, Il va'ol, Muhus lemuhus, the Muhus el nimshach el, from one state, one paradigm to another, like from Seichel to Midas. It's not like that. What's Seichel and Midas? That the Muhus Seichel, the intelligence, the concept, the idea that we contemplate is nimshach ba'ol. The reason for that is because the seichel is not atzmi. It's ha'ara, it's a reflection. And therefore, it can move on to the next level of ha'ara, which is the midas. Like he said, when a person conceives of an idea and understands it well, and appreciates its value, his seichel is mispal, gets excited, gets stimulated, and that afterwards also stimulates and creates excitement and a stimulation in the heart. So that's the nimshach husa seichel ba'amida, ha'ish yidiyas hatev shel davar shebeseichel bo belev shenasa b'chinas tamel amida. So the spilus of the mind, the stimulation on the intellectual level, transfers over and transmits into the spilus of the midas. And that is the classic example of Ilav Olol, Yesh Miyesh. So he's saying that philosophers made the mistake and say that existence is created that way by God, that God is the cause and the effect is the world. So there's something commensurate between them. Yes, there's a shift in paradigm, but it's not a paradigm shift to the point of completely two different realities. Yesh Ma'ayin, as we shall learn, is that it's two different realities. And that's where we stopped. I do want to give a little update. I began studying a little more the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, Mika Hashem Elokeinu HaMagbiel L'Sheves, that Chanukah Maimer, printed in my Mori Admur Amtsoi, Mittler Rebbe's Maimor on page 361 and on, 70-page Maimor, which is based on and elaborates on the Maimor of the Alter Rebbe by the same name of the Maimor that was cited earlier on page 1352. Torah where there's a Maimor and there's a beard on the Maimor. And I will tell you my findings are so far. I'm going to get right now into Mner Mitzvah Torah we spoke about after the class yesterday, but that much of what we're learning now is actually quoted straight from there with elaboration. So actually this whole idea to understand, he actually asked that question. How is it that a neshama could transform an animal soul, which is its diametric opposite of bittul? That question in different words is asked by the Mittler Rebbe. It's actually also asked by the Alter Rebbe in his original Maimer, but Mittler Rebbe, it's even more pronounced. And the Mittler Rebbe goes about answering it exactly as the structure we're learning here, that we understand Shema Yisrael and Baruch Shem, that leads to Vahafta, to understand how can you achieve a love of B'chol Avavcha B'shnei Yitzarecha, both of your entire heart, both sides of the heart, the divine soul and the animal soul. We have to understand what is Shema, the Yichud of Shema and Baruch Shem, Yichud Eloi, Yichud Tata. So I began even marking, so everything we're learning here is either the exact language or an elaboration upon the Mittler Rebbe's discussion on this topic. And I went even further to realize that the next 10 pages till the end is all based on the Mittler Rebbe, much more than I first initially thought. I said already that, but now it's clear to me. And more than that, I'm even more confident that when the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer continues, you see how this would have continued, because he literally is going in the same structure, in the same order. So now it's a long, long discussion on Yichud. And the more we understand the Yichud, the more we can understand how the animal soul can understand as well the connection to God. Basically, Chassidus Chabad explaining the idea of Yichud Eloi, Yichud Tata is such that the animal soul can understand it on its own. And that's why the animal soul is capable of moving from a state of utter Yeshes, Teikef HaYeshes, to a state of Bittul and acclamation, and also joining the divine soul in its connection to godliness. Furthermore, he even connects this with V'yadaita Ayin Beis levavecha ke'avayu Elokim b'shamayim emal v'aretz mitachas. So that really connects this themes also to the themes we've been learning from the middle of volume 2. And finally, this is in Maimer of Torah Eid and the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer. He also brings it back to Riyah, that Shema Yisrael is hearing. And then there's a higher level, Torah Eid brings us to a level of Riyah, where we actually see. Now, we all know Riyah was a central theme that began in 1350 as well, or 1352, page 1352. So really, when you think about it, all rounds out together, and when you finish the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, you really see the connection. And I'm convinced that the Rebbe Rashab was going to go in that direction. So based on that, I'm probably leaning that we should learn the Maimarim of the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe. But I'll do it. But I think we should do it when we finish what we're learning here, and then we'll see it in broader context. And I'm saying that not just because it's nice to learn it, but because the truth is, you could understand where Ayin Beis would go on, because the Rebbe Rashab is definitely following that narrative, those themes. So it's all exciting because it really does tie things together, and it's something worthwhile also publicizing, because a lot of people don't know about what would happen at the end of Ayin Beis. Most people think that's it ends there. But when you see the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, you realize essentially, and it would probably go, I thought it was not much more. Based on the Mittler Rebbe, I could see the Rebbe Rashab going another 50 pages probably. Maybe even more for all I know. But at least that, because based on the Mittler Rebbe's ideas and seeing where the Rebbe Rashab is at when we finish Hamshach Ayin Beis, it's pretty clear that there was a lot more to add to tie it all back together. What's also very interesting is how the Mittler Rebbe really does embellish and flesh out the Alter Rebbe's Maimer in explaining literally the role of a neshama, the role of a mitzvah, the role of Torah, and we're also, of course, going to talk about the role of tefillah, which is mamata l'mayla. So all this is going to be part of the whole fuller discussion. But right now, where we are is the beginnings of understanding Yichud. And the way he's explaining it now, straight from the Mittler Rebbe, is the idea of Briya's Yesh Ma'ayin. But to understand Yesh Ma'ayin, we have to compare it to Yesh Miyesh. And we'll soon understand why that's so vital in understanding the higher level of Yichud. But I will just say this, even though we haven't read it inside yet. If existence was Yesh Miyesh, as he's going to explain, meaning that we have something in common, you can imagine that the animal soul is not going to easily be transformed. Because if at the end of the day, the Yesh of this world is just an evolved state of a higher state of Yesh, yes, Elokus and so on, it's not really the ultimate Yichud. Yichud means that this world is completely bottled because it's Yesh Ma'ayin, because God is so different than existence. That's going to be vital in understanding Yichud, and in turn, the impact that it has on the animal soul. And I believe that's going to be a key element in how we can explain how the animal soul is transformed. But we'll get there when we get there. So that's where we're up to right now. And I'm ready to continue unless somebody wants to ask a question. So we're going to continue now the parentheses. And I will say that even though this is based on the Mittler Rebbe, most of the section that we just learned, but Seichel and Midas, is the Rebbe Rashab's addition, and including this parentheses. So the parentheses begins on the line Shebe Seichel. So we're talking about 3, 6, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 lines from the top of the page. The parentheses, that's where we're up to. And the pages, the text can be found at ayinbeis.com. Here we go. So what have we established? That the spilus of seichel, meaning when you appreciate the value of something, that before you thought about it, before you concentrated and contemplated, you didn't know the value. Now you've discovered the value of something really precious. It excites you, first in the mind, and then ilavol, yesh mi yesh, from the mind, that excitement translates into the heart. So though the emotions and the cognitive faculties are very different, but they are in the same domain, the same world. They speak to each other, like a teacher and a student in a way. But here it's within ourselves. Our mind speaks to our emotions. And this is happening every day, all the time. You know, when you read something, you hear something, you learn something, it affects your mind. And often that translates in affecting your heart, your emotions. So in that context, he starts with the parentheses. Now you could argue, one second, maybe these are two different personalities altogether. Says the Rebbe Rashab, no, it's the same muhus. Even though he called him a muhus ha-seichel, ba'amida, or before he used the words muhusin askola, muhus le-muhus. Just want to see the actual language. 1 second. Yeah. Muhus le-muhus, muhus ha-ila nimshach la'ol. He says, v'hu oisa muhus. This excitement that transmits from the mind to the heart is the same personality. Remember, the word muhus in Hebrew comes from the word mahu. Mitzias means its existence, its being, it's so-called, its mechanics. When you say the mitzias of a thing, you say that's the technical, the mechanics of it, the object itself. When you say muhus, you say mahu. What is his personality like? So he says, it's Eisemahus, mind and emotions. Rak, so what's the difference? Rak sheba ba'akshama, Yeser. It's become more materialized, more substantial. We learned the word hakshama earlier before as well, but hakshama can mean many things. And hakshama can mean more ego, but hakshama here means like more congealed, more solidified, more concrete. Or more substance, more substantial, more kshama. In other words, seichel is more edel, more refined, and midas are more tangible, if you wish. The beseichel hu yediyas tuva dover be'etzem, because in the mind, it's the understanding, is the perception of the quality of this thing that you are appreciating. Be'etzem, you're talking about the value of it. It's like someone with the mind analyzer says, this thing has value to it. You know, let's just talk on a business level. Someone presents to a business person a proposal for a particular product or a particular service or a particular innovation. And the businessman researches it and he comes to understand this is really unique. It's a tremendous opportunity. So the mind, in its diligence, has come to appreciate what this is. So that's etzem betuva dover be'etzem. He understands the value of it. Ubelev, Hergish Tev Hadover Elov. In the lev, he's already more subjective. He's feeling how this is good for him. Because the business person could say it's a great idea, but he hasn't yet determined whether this is something he wants to invest in, or it's a business that he wants to establish, or a business he wants to buy. But the lev is now coming down to something far more tangible. That it's hergish teva dover elov, like we've spoken many times. You could value something that it's good, but it doesn't mean your emotions are saying it's good for me. Here's teva dover elov. Eich shaloi teva dover. How this thing is good for him. That's what the emotions do in contrast to the seichel. But you need the seichel first because you want to make sure that it's real. And it's not just manipulating your emotions, and it's not based on a whim or on an immediate or some type of quick inspiration. So the mind establishes the value of the thing itself. It's like a valuation. It's like talking about the business example. You'll send out people to do their due diligence and work, and they'll come back and give a report. Tell me your evaluation. The valuation, this is an excellent investment. You're going to get a great return. The risk is low. It's an excellent product. No one has a product like this, etc. That's an evaluation. That's an intellectual, cognitive evaluation. Then comes next step. Oh, it's so good. Now I feel it's good for me. Good for me to get involved in. Good for me, for my intentions, for my profit. I'm using business example, but the same as it could be good for me. I benefit from it. In some way, I will enjoy this. It's something valuable to me. So this is the real process of how an intelligent person first does the research, the discovery, and then comes away with an emotional. And he calls that morbak shama. Why does he call it morbak shama? Let's see if he explains. If not, I'll explain. But he's saying, look, it says tev hadover. Yeah. V'chein ha'ispailus. So just as it is with how it moves from the cognitive to the emotional, the same as the excitement, the stimulation. There's also ispilus in the seichel. Hari b'seichel, he built in morgish. The ispilus is not that palpable, not that tangible. It's not that felt. The mind can get excited about something, but it's not quite as emotions as your personal. When you say it's good for me, you see how people become far more aroused by that. So built him in. And in general is that his mind is getting stimulated or excited on the very goodness and value of this thing. It's like you appreciate something of quality or value. You haven't yet gone over to the line that it's good for me. So it's a spilus, but it's a spilus that's not built in, it's not so murgish. And the fact that you're drawn, and the longing that is drawn to this thing because of its value, hu b'derech memela, is b'derech memela. When you appreciate something with your mind, automatically your mind is attracted to it. It's like you hear an eloquent idea or an eloquent concept or something that really is very intriguing. You're reading an article about it, could be about anything. It's not personal. It's not that you are engaging personally with it, but the idea is very intriguing. So you're drawn to it. The being drawn, meaning your stimulation is coming automatically. He doesn't have the feeling, I want this. I'll give you a perfect example for myself. It happens all the time, but just a few. I think I mentioned it at one of these classes. I was reading a week or two ago an article about the mind, how a mind develops during pregnancy, and how that by the time the end of 9 months of pregnancy, the brain of the child has developed, but not completely, because if it continued to develop, the head would get too large and the child wouldn't be able to emerge. So the first few years of a child's life, the brain develops 80% of what it will be as an adult mind is developed. Not necessarily size, but in the cells and in the neural connections, what do they call them?
Breaking up. We can't hear you very well, Rabbi. We can't hear you.
You're talking to me?
You sound fine, Rabbi. It must be on your end, Itzhak.
We're fine here.
You guys can hear me or not?
Yeah,
Can people hear him, or is it just me?
I hear you.
It looks like everyone seems to be hearing. Okay. So the neuro, what do they call the neurons, as they begin to, the synapses begin to develop. This is what the article said, at least. Every second, 1 million connections are made by a child. So I got really excited about the idea because it was fascinating to me. That's how the brain, the impressionability, or they call the plasticity of the human mind, and the effect that we have on a child, 1 million a second. Again, I don't know how they got that number, but let's even say it's a tremendous number that every second you connect with a child, 1 million connections are being made somewhere in the child's brain. Okay, that was Ispilus Sichli, which came automatic. As I was so intrigued by the idea, I got excited about it. But then came the second part. I thought about how this can help in my understanding and the teaching that I do. I work a lot with people, and a lot of it is about helping people find a better place in their lives. And a lot of it is to do with their childhood traumas or the childhood lack of nurturing, whatever happened to people when they were younger. So I began applying it in a way that it's not just a nice concept and I read an article and I registered it. That actually it's good for me in my work, in helping me do what I have to do and helping communicate with people and helping people find healing and finding hope and finding the possibilities and new opportunities in life. So I literally experienced both these things here. So the first is b'derech meila. You read something interesting or your mind explores something, you get intrigued, and definitely there's a spilus, but he says b'derech meila. The aim is a hergish shereitze b'zel la'atzmei. But you don't yet have the feeling that this is something you want and desire for you. It's a nice concept. It's a great theory, a great idea. What happens on the intellectual level? The only thing is, it's not you are drawn to it, and I want to read more, I want to pursue it because I see the value it has for me. It's only b'derech meila you're excited and drawn to it because you appreciate the good, the value, and the quality of this particular idea, so your mind is drawn to it. But then ubelev, when it comes into an emotion that you say this is good for me, then it's not just that you're automatically drawn. You will then pursue it. You're going to do everything possible to gain it because now you say, I want it. So belev, hu b'chinas ispilus murgeshes. Then it's a ispilus that's a palpable feeling, an actual being drawn that you're attracted to the point that you're going to pursue it, even be consumed by it. Shemispol v'reitza dover la'atzmei. He's excited and stimulated because he wants this now for himself. That's a whole different story. It's not just you read about it in a book, an idea that you liked. Now you want it, you go to the end of the earth to pursue it. He doesn't say that extent here, but my point is, now the hergish has turned into an active hergish, not a passive one, meaning not just automatically you feel excited about an idea. Now I want this and I will do what it takes to get it. Okay, 1 second. So what do we see from this? So he's saying it's going from the seichel to the midas. They're the same mahus, but it's much more bahakshama. So essentially, it's the same idea. The mind is drawn to it, and the mind is automatically excited by it or stimulated by it. The emotions are pursuing it, but they're still basically the same idea that you are appreciating the value of it. But one is more bahakshama. So he's going now back to the ila v'olo part. So how does the mind speak to the emotions? Since the seichel is more abstract and that is not subjective and personal. So what goes from the seichel to the midas? It's only this lower, the last level. The seichel says to the midas, I've come to discover something really valuable. And I'm sharing with you how good this is. I'm not telling you the whole process. The seichel went through a whole process of discovery and research and came to a conclusion, this is a very valuable thing. And that's where the seichel ends. What is the seichel communicating to the midas? Only it's ha'ara of it, the conclusion of my research. The seichel doesn't have to tell the midas all the big ins and outs, or all of the discovery that went on. The etzem sichli shebezeh. It's only telling it the conclusion that I've discovered this is valuable and precious. Then that can in turn stimulate the emotions. Okay, if that's the case, I'm going to pursue it because that's good for me. So then he continues, and in addition to telling the midas that this is good, the seichel also shares its excitement. That's the midas shabaseichel. It shares that this is good, and therefore I appreciate it. That's the midas shabaseichel. That's all that the seichel is communicating to the midas. Even though the seichel itself is not going into the midas because the idea and all the research and all the details are not being communicated, nevertheless, it's still hamshach from Mahus HaSeichel. Shenimshach ba'midas. Because at the end of the day, the Seichel is conveying that which it discovered. It's just not giving it on a Seichelic way, it's giving it the conclusion that my final findings, it's like we learned earlier about a judge. After long deliberation, let's say in a court case, the judge doesn't have to give all his reasons and all his deliberations. He comes away and saying, after reviewing it all, he may give some summary, but generally he'll give you and said, after all this review, I heard all the arguments, I came away with this and this conclusion. He's giving us the psak. The seichel gives the psak, so to speak. And what's the psak here? That this thing is valuable, and I am intrigued by it. So that means that it's going from the Mahus HaSeichel to the Midas. It's more Bakshama. You don't have the full Seichel behind it, but it's enough to be transmitted that you can call it Yesh Yesh. It's not Yesh Ma'ayin. He's telling us to look at a Maimer. You see here, I mentioned Tov Reish Ayin Ches. That means this was written at least then, or after that. So we see here that Ayin Beis is going already, as I mentioned, from Ayin Vov. That's when the Rebbe Rashab left Lubavitch, the beginning of Ayin Vov, and 1915 essentially. Now we're talking about 1918. That he's referring to a Maimer, just to show you that when this was written a lot later. Okay. So the parentheses comes to add in more of an analysis of the breakdown of what exactly this Yesh Miyesh Ilav Ol of Seichel and Midas is. Firstly, distinguishing between them, but then still showing how they are, at the end of the day, communicators that are in the same domain. They're in the same paradigm. Meaning, the Seichel can speak to the Midas, and we see this in our own lives. When we say our cognitive faculties, our emotional faculties, it's not two different planets. These are two forces and faculties within us that are different. And one is more the objective value of something. The other one is its subjective value to me. And therefore my personal benefits that I get from it. But they do speak to each other. That's what he adds in this parentheses. Okay. Any questions? And the connection is good. Yes, everybody hears me and sees me well.
Yes, Rabbi. It's good.
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay.
So, yeah, my question is that psak, so to speak, where the seichel is speaking to the midos, is that coming? The line here is the so is the psak coming from the psak achrona? Is it coming from the midos shebaseichel to the seichel shebamidos, or from the seichel shebaseichel to the seichel shebamidos? It's coming from me. Do you understand the question?
The way I understand what he's saying here is two steps in the cognitive process. Let's just go back to the example I gave, discovery. You go out to research something, you want to know if it has any value. After long research, you've discovered, yes, it has value. Your mind has looked through it from every angle. You've done your due diligence, you've done detective work, you've asked people, you consulted, right? The whole process. The mind is now also, the second part is the mind actually gets excited about it. It's stimulated. It's not just, okay, you can come away saying it's not a good thing. Or you can come away saying neutral. No, it's really valuable. you've presented to me something, I've discovered something extremely valuable, but you haven't yet decided whether it's something you're going to buy, or something you're going to buy into, or something you're going to pursue. In other words, the pure midas. So what he calls seichel atzmai is the process of understanding and appreciating it. Midas shebeseichel is the excitement on the intellectual level, the stimulation of the mind. And that in turn, both those things will communicate to the midas the conclusion that I've discovered something valuable and I'm really actually excited about it intellectually. And now the midas hear that opens up the door that the midas should be excited on an emotional level. He doesn't talk about seichel sheba midas here, even though the process is usually seichel, midas sheba seichel, seichel sheba midas, and midas. But you could assume seichel sheba midas would be the seichel as it's already, the midas is appreciating the idea that was conveyed to it. So seichel is one domain, midas is another. There's a process of how they communicate with each other. And I think you have to go with the example. If you get this, if it becomes too abstract, we'll lose sight of that's why I gave the example of a business example. You can give the example of anything that I mentioned, the article I wrote, that I read, that, first it intrigues you, and then you apply it and you begin to say, wow, this is really good, something I can integrate into my life. And I want more on this. I want to really bring it into my life in a personal way.
But then once it's transferring that excited intellectual stimulation, intellectual excitement, in the muscle of the oil, the shemen, we call that the nefesh sichli. So it's speaking not directly to the midos of the nefesh Bahamas. It first has to go to the nefesh sichli of the nefesh Bahamas.
Well, he didn't even address that yet. So that's already a leap that you're taking here beyond what the scope of what he's discussing right now. I don't know. I would wait to see about that when we go back to the Maimorim of the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe, because he has not here explained how this is conveyed to the animal soul. He didn't speak about animal soul here or divine soul. Here he's purely speaking about it in the context of the mind and the emotions. You could explain it in several different ways. We know the nefesh habamis is primarily midas, but there's seichel within the midas, like we learned. So is he saying that appreciating something and then appreciating is good for you means good for the nefesh habamis too? Perhaps. I'm not saying not. That could be what he's leading to, that once you understand that it's also good for you, so nefesh habamis can also appreciate it's good for you. So it starts with the seichel of a nefesh alikis. It understands the value of godliness. It in turn will create an excitement on the seichel of the nefesh alikis. That in turn will communicate to the seichel and the midas of the nefesh habamis. It's possible that this can easily be explained that way. He just doesn't spell out. Well, we did learn earlier, if you want to get to the midas of the nefesh habamis, you need two things. You need the mind. What did he say? The two things were here on page 1465. You need the understanding. The nefesh habamis has to understand, appreciate it, and it also has to see the emotional excitement of the nefesh alikis to affect it. So it could be that this can be applied here, and it could be also that this is ultimately the conclusion of how the nefesh habamis is transformed. I'm not saying otherwise. I'm just saying he's not yet spelled it out in that context, but you could explain it that way. Yeah.
Rabbi?
And it's correct to say as well, I should add, that to speak straight to the midas of the nefesh habamis before the seichel of the nefesh habamis is going to be very, very difficult. Because the midas of nefesh habamis are essentially animal instincts, animal reflexes. All they want is to eat, to drink, to take care of themselves. It's the seichel of the nefesh habamis that allows the nefesh habamis to pay attention, at least, to get it intrigued. Once you get it intrigued, it's going to be a lot easier to get to the midas. I think we learned this actually very literally. I think at the bottom of page 1463, he said the shvira begins after das in the midas. Yeah, he actually said that. That's why you have to speak to the seichel of the nefesh habamis on top of 1464, because the seichel has not had the shvira yet. The dissonance created in Toyu begins mostly in the midas, not in the seichel. So that's why Chochmah Sheb Nefesh Abamis, has seichel, and you could speak to that seichel. So it could be we bring that all together, then yes, then that you get the picture. Is that clear?
Yes. And when you said animal instincts, or I think it was the animal, there's a revolution went on in economics called animal spirits by a Nobel Prize winning economist, Schiller.
What was the point?
The point was that the whole basis of economics since Keynesian or whatever was that it's based on rational decision making, seichel. That if a market with all the proper information, the mind, the person makes rational decisions in the economy, and he came to say that the economy is not based on rational decisions. It's much more based on animal spirits, the mitos the mitos of a person. That the rational model was replaced with more of a mitos one, which was very interesting.
And if you add the Freudian model, the id, and the Freudian pleasure principle, it's the prevalent view is on a human being that we're essentially subjective creatures driven only by one thing, our own survival and our own pleasure.
What drives the stock market is greed and fear.
Okay.
There's a whole discipline of behavioral finance that grew up around those ideas.
Absolutely. And greed, who is it? Greed is good. Wasn't that the line in some famous movie?
Yeah. What was his name? Gordon Gekko?
Yeah, Michael Douglas.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But that's the Nefesh Abamis purely on its own, the midas. Then there's the Seichel of the Nefesh Abamis, and then there's the Seichel of Nefesh Elikis. The divine soul can introduce another perspective to that. Let's call it animal. What do you call it? Animal economics? What do you call it? What was it called?
Animal spirits by
Animal
Robert
spirits.
Schiller.
So Chassidus with the Nefesh Elikis introduces an alternative. And the Seichel, the Nefesh Abamis, is our redeeming element because it could be explained. The Nefesh Abamis could understand an alternative to plain hedonistic and carnal pleasures. Let's put it that way.
Baruch Hashem. Rabbi?
Yeah, please.
But could we to extend this idea to Torah, could you say that corresponding to Seichel would be learning Torah, and then corresponding to Seichel Sheba Midos, and Midos would be actually doing the mitzvah. In other words, learning the mitzvah and then doing the mitzvah, and that the light generated by each one is, the first case it's a direct light, the second case it's a reflected light, right? Choser or choser.
Or choser, yeah.
Right, light of return. So direct light is the tzaddik, whereas the reflected light is the Baal Shuvah.
How does that relate to what we're learning here?
Well, the Baal Shuvah would correspond to the oil, and that the tzaddik is the wick.
I mean, you're not talking about what we learned today. You're talking about on the previous pages.
Right, we're trying to understand ner mitzvah or Torah. That's the ultimate what we're trying to get to explain, right?
Yeah.
So now you have the interaction between.
Honestly, I'm not yet. My mind is not ready to get to that point of understanding. I'm first trying to understand what the Rebbe Rashab says. Then we could always go back. And I think we have to learn the Maimarim and Torah and the Mittler Rebbe's Maimarim that I mentioned several times to get back to that. It's possible what you're saying is correct. I just am not thinking in those terms right now. I'm trying to understand what we just learned here.
Right. So Mashiach times, you have the dance between the tzaddik and the Baal Shuvah. That's the candle. It's just a theory.
Well, meanwhile, what we've learned is that the wick is the divine soul, and the flame and the Oil is the animal soul intelligence that
Right. And the tzaddik,
the wick draws from and transforms into a divine light. That's what we've learned so far.
the tzaddik only has a divine soul, right?
I'm saying it's fine for you to apply it. I'm just not there. Can I tell you?
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Rabbi.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions on this parenthesis we just learned?
Which page are you?
1467.
Thank you.
Okay, now he continues in understanding Ilav Olol, Yesh Yesh. Before we get to Yesh Ma'ayin, so we just understood with Seichel and Midas. And now he's saying V'chein, that's within the same person. Another way of seeing, another way of explaining the Ilav Olol, the Yesh Yesh, is from a teacher to a student. The same idea we just discussed, that there's a transferring or transmission from a cause to an effect here, seichel and midas. Same is this hashpos seichel, the transmission of intelligence from a mashpia, from a transmitter, el makabel, to a recipient. Harimuhusa seichel shel mashpia, the very personality of the intelligence of the mashpia, like he said in the parentheses, it's the lower level because the teacher is not giving everything he knows to the student, but what he does give is still coming from his intelligence. It's just more like the tip of the iceberg, or the conclusion, or the outer manifestation of it. So in other words, the teacher, like I explained before with Seichel Midas, knows the idea in full depth and full profundity. And the achreina, meaning his outer conclusions or the outer expression of it, he's passing on. But what he's passing on is coming from the Mehusa Seichel of the teacher. Nimshach el makabel. So the very personality of the Seichel, it's not Yesh Ma'ayin, it's not a quantum leap and a complete different paradigm. The Seichel of the Mashpia is going to the Seichel of the Makabel. V'hu shenas is Seichel and Makabel. And that very Seichel is now becoming the intelligence of the recipient. So when a teacher is teaching well, he's teaching an idea that he has in his mind, or he's teaching, let's say, a text like we're learning here, and you're listening to it. I'll call myself the Mashpia here, you're the Makabel. I don't mean to designate it that way. I'm just giving it as an example. So your Seichel is becoming an extension of the Seichel of the Mashpia, of the ideas that are being conveyed. So it's not two worlds. It's the very Mohus of Seichel. Yes, it could be the more outer dimension of it, the conclusion, or however you want to put it, the surface level of it, but that itself is becoming the Seichel of the Makabel. Shazeu hamshachim Mohus leMohus. That's hamshachim from a Mohus leMohus. The Mohus of the personality of the higher is becoming the personality of the lower. They have something in common. Va'ayim mashin is boy le'il. And delve or look into what we learned earlier. Dibra maskul ve'daber Moshel Roshi Amatas Aleph. He's referring us back all the way to volume 1, page 68, as they cite below. I have to look up what it says there. Mahus leMahus. Okay. And these examples we've given here, Seichel to Midas, and now he's talking about Seichel to Seichel, Mashpia to Makabel. This is like Hashpah Gashmis Miyesh Liyesh, like a physical transferring of something from a Yesh to another Yesh. Kamei Bashpah Sa'oshir Elo Oni. Just like the transmission from a wealthy person to a poor person. So when he gives him money and gives him support, it's Yesh Miyesh. He's giving part of what he has to the recipient. Shazel Ashpas Mahus Dover. He's not giving him something that is infinitely distant or just a reflection. He's giving him the very Mahus of the support that he's providing, whether it's money or food or whatever it may be. That's the hashpah. This example, Osher El Oni, is from Mittler Rebbe's Maimer. I marked that here. Another example of this, of passing on Yesh mi Yesh, V'chein hashpah ruchnius shebezeh. There's also when a person gives tzedakah, it's not just the physical giving, there's also a spiritual side to it. V'hu hamafaiseh. So the Rambam explains that there's giving, you can give tzedakah and you give physically, but there's another mafaiseh, meaning you also comfort him. You say kind words. A person can give tzedakah and physically they've helped another, but they didn't smile. They didn't comfort the person. It may even be begrudgingly. So there's another element that says about tzedakah that makes tzedakah on a higher level is that you mafayis, you comfort, you console, you show kind mafayis. Yeah, comfort is the right word. Shazehu moya shebelibay. That is the light, the luminary in the heart. In other words, it's part of the emotional exchange going on. So it's not just yesh mi yesh, a coin, money, or food, or other materials. It's also, there's also a transmission of heart, of empathy. So this is amshach of the midas hachesed within the giver, his kindness, that elevates the spirits, that lifts the spirits of the ani. Like explained elsewhere. So you see the yesh mi yesh here is also in this commensurate element. There's a relationship going on. So the Osher is obviously not giving him all his money, but he's giving him substance. Mahus le mahus, yesh mi yesh, both physically and also, like he says here, emotionally. The b'chol zeh, in all these examples, everything we just described, yesh beis dvarim. In all these, we find two elements, two aspects. Ha'echad, ha'erech ve'ishtavus, da'olah ela ilah, a commensurate, proportionate commonality between the effect and its cause. The effect would be the midas compared to the seichel, the student compared to the teacher, the ani compared to the wealthy one. So number one, you see a proportionate and commonality between cause, effect, and cause. The ma'achashu being that it's amshacha coming from his very personality, the seichel or the yesh that's going to the other yesh, because they're coming from the same, from the mahus. If it was just like the sun, a reflection of the sun is in its light. The sunlight is not giving you the mahus of the sun. So you don't necessarily have to say there's something in common. The sun is a luminary. It has sunlight. The light is reaching us, but that's a reflection. Here he's saying the very mahus is coming over. So therefore, that tells you there's something in common between one mahus and the way it's transmitted. Like, let's say, the money of the wealthy person, the seichel of the teacher. The mahus le-mahus. Even though he did say that saskola seichel itself is ha'ara. But that's ha'ara compared to the source, not a ha'ara compared to the recipient. Yeah. Because he said, good. And so therefore you have to say that they have some proportionate relationship one with the other. That's one thing. He said, Beis dvarim, v'habeis. The second thing all these examples offer us, hushinoi v'ispailus b'ha'ilah. Not just there's something in common, but something changes and is impacted. Hispilus stimulates. It affects the ilah, the cause. Bein koydem hashpah ube'es hashpah. There's a difference between before he began to be Mashpia and during the hashpah. In other words, when a teacher is invested in teaching, or the usher sees someone that's in need of help, physical help, emotional help, or the seichel is communicating to the midas, it's not in a detached way. Because it's actually engaged and it's a mahus to mahus, it means it's going to have an effect on the mashpia. A difference between before he's mashpia and after he's mashpia. Like you see, there's no way a teacher or an usher or mashpia can remain completely detached and completely dispassionate. There is going to be a shin and a spilus between that distinguishes between before the hashpah and after and during the hashpah. That's yesh mi yesh. That is in the world that we know of, all interactions and engagements and negotiations. Everything we know of is in this form and fashion. Every interaction between two people, examples he gave here, but really you can broaden it to every interaction. This is going to lead us now, that like he says, the next line, V'ef shalemer kedugma zula mayla misavas hanevroim ha'beiri yizbarach. Everything we learned here is meant to tell us now, and now that we know how it is in Yesh mi Yesh, we can't say any of this. We can't apply any of this when you're talking about the creator and the creation. That's going to be now the next section that's going to help us understand real yichud, that we're connecting to something of a different reality. It's not the same domain, the same paradigm, the same world, like we just learned Yesh mi Yesh. And we'll understand also the difference between how the philosophers see it and how Torah Chassidus explains it. But I'm going to stop here by the end of this paragraph. Let's take some questions, and then we shall continue next class. Yeah.
Why does this process of hashpah that we just talked about, why does that effectuate a change in the mashpia? I can understand how it effectuates a change in the mushpa and the person who's influenced, but why in the mashpia? You're excited about an idea. You tell us about it. Why does that affect how excited you are about the idea?
Because you're engaged, because it's the very mahus. It's not like the sun is not affected by sunlight. But here we're talking about a yesh mi yesh, a mahus to mahus. It's an engagement. The mind has to exert itself, firstly to understand and appreciate it, and then to mashpia, whatever it's communicating. It doesn't it's
like
it's
a connection.
involved.
Are you saying like there's a change in the sense that you've made a connection? It's that idea is not just sitting alone in your head, but you connected with the other.
No, I gave the like teacher to student, or seichel amidus is also like mashpia makabel in that sense. The contrast would be sun and sunlight. The sun is completely not affected by the light that shines from it. Where here, in this context, the cause and the effect, the cause is engaged with the effect and vice versa.
Right. I understand what it says here. Like I understand the words, and I understand how critical this is because
can a teacher not be affected? Can a teacher not be affected before he teaches and after? Of course he's affected because he has to immerse himself. He has to give of his seichel to another. There's no way he can do that in his sleep. There's no way he can do that in a way that's completely meaningless. He's immersed in it. That immersion is a change. Before he taught, he was not immersed, he was not engaged, and after he teaches, he's engaged, he's involved. Even if, and of course, we're not even getting into the passion involved and the investment and the effort and exertion to explain it all. But all that is part of an involvement. It's an involvement, an engagement.
Mm-hmm. I understand. The reason I'm drilling down on this is because
I'm not sure why you're drilling down. It's, to me, so
well, I don't, because the flip side is obvious that when you're talking about Atzmus, there's no shinui there. That's what he's going to come to say.
But that's what he's going to discuss in the next paragraph.
I get it. So that's why I'm trying to understand this better. Maybe Robin was going to suggest an idea, but I understand how there's an engagement, but I don't understand how you are changed. I don't understand how you are changed.
Isaac.
Absolutely. Of course.
Could I jump in?
As soon as a person is teaching, it says, Shinui ben koidem hashpah ube'es hashpah. When a wealthy person gives $100 to somebody, there's a shinui in him before he gave it and after he gave it. Same idea with the seichel of a teacher. Same idea with seichel and mids. Go ahead, Robin.
I'm sorry. I was thinking maybe a better example, not better, but maybe one that might you might be able to grasp better, Isaac, is if you do a kindness for somebody, just even, and that's your being a mashpia, right? To that person, you're going outside of yourself, right? And it can be really like on some level, like I'm doing this, I want to do it, but I really want. Then you see the transformation in the person. It transforms you because you say, wow, I did something. I went beyond myself with that kindness. And I had no idea this meant so much to that person. It's happened to me. And I just it blows you away. I think it's.
Yeah, well, that's a good example. But if you're a math teacher and you're teaching a child 2 + 2 = 4, and you do it 10,000 times in your life, I don't understand how it's maybe the first.
Every child is different. Look, you could have a child that doesn't get it. And no matter how hard you try, that child cannot get it. And so you really have to look into yourself and say, okay, what am I doing that I'm not communicating with this, I'm not giving over this knowledge to this child. And that challenge in itself will change that teacher. It's not rote. Every interaction you have with people is very particular, very specific.
Maybe it's a matter of a sense of accomplishment that we all feel when we are Mashpia.
I just have to interject. That is an additional point. If it helps you, great. Even without that, he's saying the very fact that you have to exert yourself. You're not doing this. This does not come automatic. You have to deliberately choose to teach seichel to someone else. That is a shinui in the mashpia. Doesn't matter whether, and that alone is already a shinui.
That was helpful. Thank you. Now I understand. Thank you.
I think that doesn't that relate? The rabbi taught us about shefa flow versus just broadcasting the lesson, where like the sun just broadcasts light, doesn't have any effect on. So if you're a really good teacher, you care about the student. That's where it's coming from you. It starts with caring about the student.
Maybe that's why he brought mefaise in the parentheses, not just you give tzedakah, you give it with empathy. That just drives the point home.
Exactly.
Now, listen, can you have a teacher that's completely aloof and apathetic and doesn't really care one way or the other? Of course you could. Yeah. But even there, I would argue he still has to come into the classroom and he has to speak, and he may get tired from speaking. I mean, he definitely has to engage. It's just being that he's not bringing his whole emotions in there. He's not bringing, like let's say the usher throws some money to a guy and just runs off. So maybe it's not as much shinui in him as if he comforts him and consoles him and lifts his spirits. He's more engaged, like a teacher that's more engaged than another teacher. But in general, the fact is, because you're dealing with yesh miyesh, mahus to mahus, you're not, as I said, it's not like sunlight. You'll see the contrast. Lamaila may be helpful as well. But okay, good. I'm glad we got what we got.
Well, the beauty in this mushal is when you think about, and I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but they say there's no shinui ba'atzmus, there's no shinui in elikus. That just the beauty of it, it's infinite. Just like the well of kindness and love and goodness that the Eibishter bestows on us is infinite. There's enough to go around, right? And that's and every year Rosh Hashanah there's a new energy, and there's forever there will always be a new energy, and it's so beautiful to think that the Eibishter has so much to give that it never depletes him even a single scintilla, right? Or doesn't change him at all. He's constantly that way.
Yeah, but then there's going to be the question the other way around. Does God care? Is he so detached and doesn't affect? Is he affected by our mitzvahs, so to speak, kavyachol? We'll leave for later. That we'll talk about.
I was thinking about that. I mean, he wouldn't have. I think it's on the level of will, right? I mean, he wouldn't have.
He chose to be affected.
Desired.
He chooses to engage. Yes, and we learned this also earlier. We'll discuss it when we get there.
Right. The rabbi.
I'm just getting excited about where he's headed with this. Yeah.
Anybody else want to say anything?
Remember, the rabbi taught us the lesson about Malchus of Atzilus, and below there's change, but above that, there's no change. But yet somehow it can affect the Eibishter even at Atzmus. He cares
He's
about
going to
us.
talk about this actually on page 1471.
Oh,
What you just quoted, he's going to quote on page 1471. Yeah.
anyhow, there's no teach like Rabbi Jacobson, because even if we don't get the lesson, the rabbi next time comes back and tries to explain it again. So he has us in mind. He cares about us. That's the
I
greatest
appreciate
teacher.
that.
Thank you, Rabbi. The rabbi just doesn't broadcast into the
Well, I could
world.
tell you for sure, in my hashpah, I definitely am affected. That I can tell you without question.
Yeah.
But the question is it positive or negative?
It's actually, it's all positive.
All
Even
positive.
the negative is positive. Even, listen, it's part of the process, questions and answers, and even frustrations. That's part of the process. There's a lot of things that I embrace it all.
Part of being a human being.
Baruch Hashem.
Let's
Well,
put it
part of
this
being a
way:
teacher.
there are far more negative things in life than any disagreements or debates we may have.
Right. If you have to toil in Torah.
Exactly right.
Well,
Exactly.
especially if it's L'Shem Shemayim.
I mean,
This is very engaging, very challenging, and I definitely, as I said, I got pretty excited reading the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer more in depth. Still much more to go, but coming together very interestingly.
Very exciting. I'm really excited that you're going to teach the Alter Rebbe's Maimer and the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer. I'm just thrilled. So thank you very much for making that decision. It's like really so exciting. Everybody should be. I mean, this class is. We already have this continuation. It's going to take a while, like you said. It's a major decision you made, and I just want to say I'm very, very grateful and happy about that.
Yeah.
I didn't hear that part. Are you going to do it before we finish Ayin Beis?
No, I think we can't do it before because we need to learn it inside here and then we can broaden it. I look at the Alter Rebbe, Mittler Rebbe as being like the whole picture, but I would do it through Ayin Beis. I wouldn't start now going there. It would get too complicated. I have a plan. My plan is we should continue reading this, and then you'll see once we get this down pat, or to some extent, be a lot easier to understand those Maimarim. We did something similar. I don't know if you were here at the end of volume 2. You remember we were learning for a while, over a month, I think, from Tafresh Tzadik Daled. Remember the Friedrich Rebbe's Maimer?
Yes.
About Ayin, the 2 levels of Ayin and Bittel and this, a whole. We went through all of it. We learned it for weeks on end.
That was wonderful.
That was like supplemental. That was the Friedrich Rebbe. That came after the Rebbe Rashab, explaining the ideas in Ayin Beis. Here it's the other way around. The Rebbe Rashab is explaining the ideas from those Maimarim. But the way to go is to learn it inside here because it's a very fascinating piece. I was never aware of this part of Chassidus, to be honest. I mean, I know the themes, but the details, especially with the whole breakdown of how it works with Ner, Mitzvah, and Torah and Neshama, and it's very well spelled out by the Mittler Rebbe. All the questions that we have, like what's the difference between Ner Mitzvah and Ner Neshama? That's like a big one. That it was that I think now I come to understand better. What's the difference between the two? And so on. So, but ultimately also Ria was a big key as well to me. Ria, because it's essentially the Rebbe Rashab, volume 3, takes 3 or 4, I would say 4 or 5 Maimarim from the Mittler Rebbe, and is bringing them all together. Some of the Alter Rebbe in there thrown in as well. I'll point that out. I have some pages upon pages of several of these Maimarim. Yeah. Okay, good.
Very
So we're
exciting.
stopping
Thank
here.
you, Rabbi.
Yeah, we stop at the end of the paragraph on page 1467. We'll stop